movement in the hallway mirror, just out of frame. Story 1. Submitted by Janet. Someone was there every time I looked away. I noticed it on my second errand. Not the first. The first was too ordinary to register as anything but routine. I'd left my apartment around 10 a.m. with a short list on my phone. Groceries, pharmacy, bank. A day off I was trying to be productive with, nothing more. The weather was clear, cool enough to keep my jacket zipped, busy enough outside that I didn't feel isolated. The grocery store was normal, bright, loud, forgettable. It was when I walked back to my car that something tugged at my attention. Not fear, just awareness. I unlocked my door and hesitated before getting in, struck by the strange feeling that I'd missed something important. Like walking into a room and forgetting why you're there. I looked around the parking lot. Nothing stood out. I shrugged it off and drove to the pharmacy. Inside, the line was long. I stood scrolling on my phone, half listening to the radio overhead. That was when I felt it, the sensation of being placed. Not watched exactly, like someone had chosen where to stand relative to me. I shifted my weight. The feeling didn't go away. I glanced up. People everywhere. An older man arguing about insurance. A woman tapping her foot. A kid pulling cough syrup off the shelf and being scolded for it. No one looking at me. I told myself I was imagining it and paid for my prescription. Outside again, I felt lighter. Movement helps rationalize things. Standing still lets your thoughts wander. By the time I reached the bank, I'd forgotten the feeling entirely. The bank was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of place where sounds echo just enough to make you aware of your own body, your footsteps, your breathing, the rustle of paper. I filled out a deposit slip and stepped to the counter. While the teller counted, I glanced at the security mirror in the corner. The wide, curved kind meant to show blind spots. That's when I saw him. Just for a second. Tall, dark jacket, standing behind one of the pillars near the entrance. Not facing me, facing slightly away, like he'd just turned or was about to. The mirror warped the distance, flattened depth. It was hard to tell how close he really was. But I remember thinking, that's too near to be comfortable. I blinked, looked again. The space behind the pillar was empty. I didn't turn around. I don't know why. I tell myself it was instinct, but honestly, it felt more like fear of embarrassment. Fear that I'd spin around and catch someone minding their own business and realize I'd made a moment out of nothing. So I stayed still, finished my transaction, walked out without looking back. In the parking lot, my hands were shaking. I unlocked my car, slid inside, locked the doors immediately, too quickly, like someone who knew they were being ridiculous but did it anyway. I sat there breathing until my heart slowed. I didn't see him again. That should have been the end of it. But the rest of the day developed a rhythm I couldn't ignore. Everywhere I went, there was a lag. Not someone following directly behind me. Nothing cinematic. Just a sense that space was rearranging itself when I wasn't looking. At the gas station, I finished pumping and turned to put the nozzle back, only to feel that same subtle awareness settle in. I glanced at the reflection in my side mirror. No one. Inside the convenience store, I reached for a drink and felt it again, someone occupying the space I'd just vacated. I stepped aside. Nothing filled it. I started noticing how often people weren't there. Empty patches, blind angles, the places where someone could stand without being obvious. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted. Not physically, mentally. Like I'd been holding a muscle tense without realizing it. I drove home, telling myself the errands were done. The day was almost over, and I could reset. That I'd laugh about this later. At a red light 2 blocks from my apartment, I checked my rearview mirror. A car sat behind me. Ordinary. White sedan. Driver looking down at their phone. Nothing wrong. The light changed. I pulled forward. The car stayed. Not tailing me, Not aggressively, just there. I made a pointless turn into a side street. So did the car. My pulse ticked up. I told myself it meant nothing. There were only so many routes through the neighborhood. I slowed slightly. The car maintained distance. When I parked in front of my building, I waited before getting out. The white sedan rolled past without stopping. Relief washed over me so fast it left me lightheaded. I climbed the stairs, unlocked my door, and stood inside my apartment, breathing in familiar air. That should have been the release. Instead, I felt something settle, like the day hadn't ended. I went to the kitchen, set my keys down, and froze. The chair at the small table was pulled out. Not far, just a few inches. I stared at it for a long time. I live alone. I always push it in. I checked the locks. Both deadbolt and handle were secure. Windows closed. Nothing missing. Nothing disturbed. I sat on the couch until the sun went down, lights on, TV noise filling the space. I kept thinking about the man in the mirror. How he hadn't been watching me. How he'd been facing away. Like he'd already seen enough. That night, I stood in my bathroom brushing my teeth and caught movement in the hallway mirror. Not behind me, not beside me, but just out of frame. I turned my head. Nothing. I finished brushing without looking again. I haven't seen him since. But sometimes, when I'm out running errands, I'll feel that same lag in the world. That same sense of space being prepared for me. And I think about that single glimpse. About how it only happened once. Like a mistake. Or a test. And how ever since that day, I've had this quiet, persistent feeling that if I ever see him again, it won't be by accident. Story 2. Submitted by Mandy. I didn't notice it the first time. That's the part that bothers me now. How ordinary everything felt at the beginning. No sudden fear. No instinct screaming at me to run. Just a normal walk home. The same one I'd taken hundreds of times before. I work late. The kind of late where the streets are technically still awake, but nobody's really outside anymore. Store lights are on, but doors are locked. Cars pass occasionally, but they don't stop. The sidewalks belong to you for long stretches at a time. That night was cool, dry, quiet. I remember checking my phone at the crosswalk because I was bored, not because I was nervous. I didn't hear footsteps behind me. I noticed the timing. Every time I slowed down, just slightly, without thinking, the sounds around me adjusted with me. Traffic noise faded at the same rate. Wind in the trees softened at the same pace. It was subtle enough that I didn't consciously register it as wrong. It just felt synchronized. I turned down my usual side street, the one that cuts through a residential block before opening up toward my apartment complex. The streetlights there are spaced too far apart, leaving long bands of shadow between them. Halfway down the block, I felt that strange pressure between my shoulder blades. That sensation you get when you think someone might be standing too close behind you. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that because stopping to check felt embarrassing. Like admitting I'd watched too many videos or read too many stories about things that happened to other people. Instead, I adjusted my pace. The pressure stayed. Not stronger. Not weaker. Just present. I could have turned around. I know that. But something about the idea felt wrong. Not dangerous, intimate. Like acknowledging something that would then expect a response. So I kept walking. I passed 3 houses where porch lights were still on. One had a TV flickering blue through the front window. I remember thinking how normal it all looked, how stupid I was being. Then I reached the part of the block where the sidewalk narrows because of overgrown hedges. The pressure deepened, not like someone getting closer, more like the space behind me had become occupied. I crossed the street without needing to. The kind of meaningless decision you make when you're trying to test a feeling without admitting you're testing it. The pressure crossed with me. I told myself I was tired. I told myself my body was inventing patterns because the street was quiet and my brain was bored. But when I reached the end of the block and stepped back into brighter light, I felt something shift, not disappear, not retreat, just reposition. That was when I noticed the sound. Not footsteps. Never footsteps. Breathing has rhythm. So does walking. This didn't. It was the absence of sound where there should have been something. A dead zone in the ambient noise, right behind me, that moved when I moved. I unlocked my phone and pretended to scroll, angling the screen just enough to catch reflections. All I saw was glare. Light streaks. My own face, pale and too focused. No one behind me. That somehow made it worse. I reached my apartment complex and felt relief hit so fast it almost made me dizzy. The gate buzzed open. I stepped inside. I waited for the pressure to fade. It didn't. The courtyard was empty. The fountain was off. One stairwell light flickered. I slowed. The pressure slowed. I stopped walking altogether. The pressure didn't advance. It stayed exactly where it had been all along. That's when the thought finally landed, fully formed in my head, cold and unwelcome. Whatever this is, it isn't following me. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, not running. I didn't want to give anything the satisfaction of urgency. Inside my apartment, I locked the door and leaned against it, listening. Nothing. No sound from the hall. No footsteps retreating. No elevator. No doors opening or closing. I slept badly. The next night, it happened again. Same timing. Same pressure. Same dead zone of sound. Different street. I took a longer route home on purpose, doubling back once, cutting through a parking lot that made no sense directionally. The pressure adapted. Not chasing. Matching. I didn't feel hunted. I felt studied. By the 4th night, I realized something else. The pressure didn't start when I left work. It started 2 blocks from my apartment. Always the same spot. Like a switch being flipped. I tested it the next evening. Walked halfway home. Then turned around and went back toward the main road. The pressure faded. I stood there, heart pounding, pretending to check my phone, waiting. Nothing. I walked toward home again. 2 blocks out. It returned. Not stronger. Just resumed. That night, I didn't go inside. I walked past my building. Past the gate. Past the lights. Past the familiar safety of it. The pressure followed me for exactly 1 block. Then it stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. Like it had reached a boundary. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty sidewalk ahead, realizing my hands were shaking. I went back home and locked myself in. The next morning, I found scuff marks near my door. Nothing obvious. Nothing anyone else would notice. Just faint arcs on the concrete, like someone had stood there shifting their weight. Waiting. Long enough to wear the surface down. I started leaving the TV on at night. Started checking reflections without meaning to. Started listening for the absence of sound instead of noise itself. It hasn't followed me anywhere else. Only home. Only when I'm almost there. And the worst part is this. I don't think it wants me to notice it. I think it wants me to get used to it. Because every night now, when that pressure settles in behind me, I feel something else layered underneath the fear. Something disturbingly close to recognition. Like it's been there longer than I have. And I'm the one who's late getting home. Story 3. Submitted by Christy. College campuses aren't supposed to feel unsafe. That's what everyone says. That's why it took me so long to accept that something was wrong. The first time I noticed it, I was walking to my morning class. It was a Tuesday. Same route I'd taken all semester. Across the quad, past the library, down the concrete path that runs behind the science building. The sidewalks were busy with students drifting in loose clusters, half asleep, backpacks hanging off one shoulder. I felt normal. Then I felt accounted for. It's hard to explain without sounding dramatic. It wasn't fear. It was the sense that my movement had been anticipated. Like the space I was about to occupy had already been made ready. I stopped walking. People flowed around me without a second glance. Whatever that feeling was, it didn't collide into me. It didn't rush. It just waited. I shook it off and kept going. During lecture, I sat halfway up the hall. I remember because I always sit in the same row, same seat. It's close enough to see the slides clearly, but far enough to feel anonymous. Halfway through class, I became aware that I hadn't shifted in my chair once. I was listening too carefully, not to the professor, to the room. The scrape of pens, the coughs, the subtle rustle of jackets, and beneath it all, the awareness that there was a gap in the noise somewhere behind me. A pocket of stillness that didn't belong in a room with 200 people. I didn't turn around. I waited for class to end and left with the crowd. Outside, the feeling lifted almost immediately. That night, I told myself it was nothing. The next day, it happened again. Different class, different building, same sensation. Always when I was walking between places. Never when I was inside a classroom or dorm. Only in transit. Like something couldn't, or wouldn't, approach me once I stopped moving. By the third day, I started changing my routes. Nothing dramatic. Just small deviations. Cutting across grass instead of following sidewalks. Taking stairs instead of elevators. Lingering at water fountains longer than necessary. The feeling adapted. Not instantly, but it adjusted fast enough to make coincidence feel like a weak explanation. Thursday afternoon, I was in the student union grabbing coffee. It was crowded, loud, chaotic, the kind of place where paranoia should suffocate under sheer volume. I waited for my drink near the pickup counter and glanced at my phone. That's when I saw him, reflected in the glass of a display case. Just the top half of his body, standing still in the middle of motion. Everyone else around him was blurred, caught mid-step, mid-gesture, but he wasn't moving. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, like he was waiting for me to finish. I shifted my weight. The reflection didn't change. I picked up my drink and walked away without looking again. My hands were shaking so badly I spilled coffee on my wrist and barely felt the heat. That was the only time I saw him. After that, it wasn't about sight anymore. It was about placement. If I left the library at 8:40 p.m., the feeling arrived at 8:42. If I studied later than usual, it waited. If I skipped class, it didn't show up at all. Like it only existed when I followed my own routine. I stopped walking with headphones in. Stopped scrolling while moving. I became hyper-aware of footsteps, but there was never a matching set. Never a pattern I could point to. Just that sense of something being there without needing to announce itself. On Friday night, I stayed late in the library on purpose. Past midnight, I waited until the building was almost empty. I told myself that if the feeling came back, I'd confront it. Turn around. Make it real. When I finally left, the air outside was cold and damp. The quad lights cast long shadows across the paths. I took 3 steps, and the feeling bloomed into place behind me. I stopped. It stopped. I stood there for a long time, heart hammering, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. No footsteps. No movement. No escalation. Just presence. Eventually, I walked back to my dorm without looking back. The next morning, my roommate asked why I'd changed my schedule. I laughed and asked what she meant. She said, "You've been leaving and coming back at different times all week. I figured you were avoiding someone." My stomach dropped. I asked her why she'd think that. She shrugged. "Because someone's been standing across the courtyard lately," she said. "Always looking at the building like they're waiting for a person, not a place." I didn't ask what they looked like. I didn't need to. I changed my schedule again after that. I stopped being predictable, and the feeling stopped. Mostly. But sometimes, when I fall back into routine, when I walk somewhere without thinking, when I let my guard down, I feel it return. Not closer, not more aggressive, just patient, like it doesn't mind waiting. After all, it already knows where I'll be. Story 4. Submitted by Lauren. I'm 34 now, and my parents still tell this story like it's funny. They laugh when they get to the part where they lost me. They shake their heads, call me dramatic, say I'd always had an overactive imagination. My mom usually ends it by saying, "You were only gone for a few minutes." I've stopped correcting her, because it wasn't the getting lost that stayed with me. It was what happened while no one was looking. I was 10 years old when it happened, at a large outdoor market near the river. Rows and rows of stalls, food trucks, handmade signs, crowds thick enough that adults had to walk sideways sometimes. I remember being annoyed because my parents kept stopping to look at things I didn't care about. Jewelry, candles, soap that smelled like pine. I was bored. I wandered ahead. Not far. Just enough that I couldn't hear my mom's voice anymore. I remember realizing I was alone in a very specific way, like a sound cutting out suddenly. The crowd noise was still there, but I felt separated from it, like I'd stepped into a pocket where I didn't belong. I turned around. Everyone was taller than me, older, moving with purpose. No familiar faces. I did what kids are told to do. I stood still. I waited. I scanned faces, expecting my parents to appear any second, smiling, relieved, calling my name. They didn't. That's when I noticed the woman. I can't tell you what she looked like in detail. That's the frustrating part. When I try, my brain fills in blanks that don't feel real. I remember her coat more than her face. Dark, buttoned, too heavy for the weather. What I remember clearly is that she was already looking at me when I noticed her. Not casually, not the way adults glance at lost kids out of concern. She was watching me like she'd been waiting for me to stop moving. I took a step to the side. She shifted too. That's when my chest tightened. Not fear exactly, but something colder. A sense of being matched. I walked toward a stall selling framed photographs, thinking I could duck behind the table and look again. She stayed the same distance away. I told myself I was imagining it, that adults moved in similar ways in crowds, that I was scared and making patterns where there weren't any. So I stopped walking and pretended to look at the pictures. I felt her stop too. Not beside me, not close enough to touch, just there. I didn't turn around. I could feel her in the way kids can feel adults behind them, pressure without contact. My hands started to shake. I shoved them into my pockets to hide it. That's when she spoke. Not to me, to someone else. At least, that's what it sounded like. She said, she was just here. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't panicked. It was calm, observational, like someone narrating a task. I don't know who she was supposed to be talking to. I never heard another voice respond. I walked away fast after that. Not running. I knew enough even then not to run. I weaved through the crowd, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Every few steps, I expected a hand to grab my arm. None did, but the feeling followed. I ducked between two food trucks, then another row of stalls. I tried to keep track of where I was going, but everything looked the same. Colors, people, noise. At one point, I tripped and scraped my knee. I remember the sting vividly, the warmth of blood soaking into my sock. I didn't stop crying then. I didn't even slow down. I found a woman with a stroller and stood near her without saying anything, pretending I belonged there. I stayed until the feeling eased slightly, until the air felt less tight. When I finally found my parents, they were frantic. My dad kept asking where I'd gone, why I hadn't stayed put. I tried to explain. I told them about the woman, about how she followed me, about how she said I'd been there. They exchanged a look. My dad crouched down and said, "Sweetie, lots of people were there. You probably just scared yourself." My mom hugged me and told me everything was okay now. They reported nothing. No one searched for anyone. We went home early. That night, I had nightmares about being lost in places that never ended. Malls, parking lots, hallways that looped back on themselves. In every dream, I felt that same presence, Not chasing, not rushing. Just keeping pace. I didn't tell anyone about the dreams. As I got older, the memory blurred the way childhood memories do. The edges softened. The fear dulled. I started to believe my parents were right. Until years later. I was in my 20s, cleaning out old boxes at my parents' house, when I found a photo album from that summer. Mostly boring pictures. Family. Vacations. Smiling faces. Then I saw one from the market. It was a wide shot my dad had taken of the crowd near the river. I almost skipped past it. But something in the background caught my eye. A dark coat. Buttoned. Too heavy for the weather. The woman wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking straight at me. At the version of me frozen mid-step, partially hidden behind a woman's shoulder. I stared at that photo for a long time. I never showed it to my parents. I don't know what I'd say now, after all these years. I don't know what she wanted. I only know this. I wasn't lost when she noticed me. I became lost after. And whatever made her pick me out of that crowd has never fully let me go. Even now, when I'm in busy places and feel that sudden, familiar tightening in the air, I don't panic. I slow down. I stop. And I wait to see if the space behind me stops too.